husband didn't show up. His mother introduced me to his wealthy partners. This is the desperate nobody my son left at the altar. They all laughed until the CEO recognized me and went pale. Wait, aren't you the owner who just bought our company? I remember the exact moment my heart should have shattered. Standing there in my custom Vera Wang gown, surrounded by 300 guests, bathed in the soft golden light of St. Michael's Cathedral, I realized I was completely alone. The altar stretched before me like a stage for humiliation. And Marcus, the man who had promised me forever, just 48 hours ago, was nowhere to be found. The whispers started small. A murmur here, a concerned glance there. I could feel them rippling through the congregation like waves in a poisoned pond. My fingers trembled around my bouquet of white peonies. Flowers I had chosen because they symbolized prosperity and good fortune. How bitterly ironic that felt now. I am Victoria Blackwell, and I am 38 years old. By most measures, I should not have been standing at that altar at all. I should have been in my corner office on the 42nd floor of Blackwell Holdings, reviewing acquisition documents and signing contracts worth more than this entire wedding venue. But love, or what I had believed was love, had made me foolish. It had made me want to believe that someone could see past the zeros in my bank account and love the woman underneath. Thank you for being here. This story isn't easy to tell, but knowing you're listening makes it easier. Stay with me until the end, and if you want, let me know where you're from in the comments. I'm curious how far these words will travel. The cathedral doors remained closed. The string quartet, confused, began the processional music for the third time. I could see my wedding planner, Daniela, frantically texting in the corner, her face growing paler by the second. Something was very wrong, and everyone in that room knew it except, apparently, for the one person who should have been walking toward me. The morning had started so differently. I had woken in the bridal suite of the Grand Hotel, surrounded by champagne and flowers and the gentle fussing of the makeup artist my sister-in-law-to-be had insisted I hire. The sun had streamed through the curtains like a blessing, and I had allowed myself to believe, just for those precious morning hours, that everything was going to be perfect. My mother's wedding dress hung in the closet, unworn. I had considered wearing it, that simple silk gown from 1985, but Helen had made it clear that such a choice would be embarrassing for a family of the Whitmore's standing. So I had purchased the Vera Wang instead, spending $40,000 on a dress I would wear once, because that was what was expected of me, because I wanted to fit in, because I wanted Helen to finally look at me with something other than barely concealed contempt. I had met Marcus Whitmore 18 months earlier at a charity gala, one I had attended specifically because I was tired. Tired of boardrooms and negotiations. Tired of men who saw dollar signs when they looked at me. Tired of the loneliness that came with being one of the wealthiest women in the state who nobody actually knew. That night, I had worn a simple black dress. No jewelry except my mother's pearl studs. No entourage, no assistant, no visible markers of the empire I had built from the ground up after my father's death left me with nothing but his debts and his dreams. I had introduced myself as Victoria, a high school teacher, which was technically true, as I sat on the board of 3 educational foundations and occasionally guest lectured at the local high school about financial literacy. The gala was for children's cancer research, a cause close to my heart since my younger brother had survived leukemia at age 7. I donated anonymously to the foundation every year, $100,000, sometimes more, but I never attended the events. That night was different. That night, I was desperately, achingly lonely. Marcus had seemed refreshingly unimpressed. He told me about his family's manufacturing business, about his dreams of expanding into green technology, about his mother's famous Sunday dinners. He was charming without being sycophantic, interested without being invasive. When he asked for my number, I gave him my personal cell. The one that fewer than 10 people in the world had access to. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in the neighborhood where I lived. The modest apartment I had rented specifically for this purpose. This experiment in being normal. He brought flowers, nothing expensive, just a simple bouquet from the corner store. He held doors and pulled out chairs and asked questions about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be seen as a person. Our courtship had been a careful dance. I maintained my cover, renting a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, driving my 10-year-old Honda instead of my Aston Martin, grading papers at coffee shops where he would meet me for casual dates. It was liberating in a way. For the first time in my adult life, I was just Victoria. Not Victoria Blackwell, the corporate shark. Not the ice queen of Wall Street, just a woman falling in love. The deception weighed on me sometimes. Late at night, when Marcus was sleeping beside me in my fake apartment with its IKEA furniture and its carefully curated ordinariness, I would lie awake and wonder if I was building a relationship on sand. But what was the alternative? Another man who saw me as a transaction. Another relationship where I could never be sure if I was loved or merely useful? But I am not a fool. I did not build a $50 million empire by being naive. So even as I fell, I watched. I documented. I noticed. I noticed how Helen, Marcus's mother, always steered conversations toward money. A teacher's salary must be so difficult, she would say, her eyes sharp as razors behind her sympathetic smile. How do you manage? Do you have family money? Inheritance, perhaps? The first time I met Helen was at one of her famous Sunday dinners. The Whitmore estate was impressive in a faded, desperate way. Clearly expensive once, but showing signs of deferred maintenance that my trained eye immediately recognized. The carpets were worn. The wallpaper was peeling in corners. The crystal chandelier was missing several pieces. Helen had greeted me with air kisses and a smile that never reached her eyes. "So this is the little school teacher my Marcus has been hiding," she had said, looking me up and down like a buyer assessing damaged goods. How refreshing. I noticed how Marcus's questions about my deceased aunt's estate became increasingly specific. How many properties? Were they paid off? Had the will gone through probate? I answered vaguely, watching his frustration bloom and then carefully hide itself behind patient smiles. The fictional aunt had been James's idea, my head of security, a former FBI agent who had been with me since my company's earliest days. Give them something to find, he had advised. A prize they think they're clever for discovering. $500,000 maybe. Enough to be interesting, but not enough to trigger serious scrutiny. So I had created her, Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, who had died childless and left her modest estate to her only niece. A small house in Connecticut, now sold. A brokerage account, now liquid. Nothing spectacular. Nothing that would make a man like Marcus Whitmore hesitate to pursue what he thought was an easy mark. I noticed the background check. My security team flagged it 3 months into our relationship. Someone had paid a private investigator to dig into Victoria Blackwell, the teacher. They found exactly what I wanted them to find. A modest savings account, a small inheritance from a fictional aunt, and a clean credit history. They did not find Blackwell Holdings. They did not find the offshore accounts, the real estate portfolio, the controlling interest in 6 different companies. They found a woman worth perhaps $500,000, enough to be interesting, not enough to be suspicious. I had confronted Marcus about it gently. My friend said she saw someone asking questions about me at the school, I had lied. Do you know anything about that? He had played it perfectly, concerned, protective, promising to look into it. Probably just routine, he had said. Mom likes to know who's coming into the family. You know how she is. I knew exactly how she was. And I was beginning to understand exactly who I was dealing with Marcus proposed on the anniversary of our first date. He did it in the park where we had shared our first kiss, with a ring that I later discovered he had financed because his credit cards were maxed out. I said yes because I wanted to believe. I said yes because part of me hoped I was wrong about everything. The ring was beautiful, a 3-carat diamond in a platinum setting, classic and elegant. I had it appraised secretly a week later. The diamond was real but flawed, worth perhaps a third of what Marcus claimed to have paid. The platinum was actually white gold. He had lied about everything, even the symbol of his commitment, but I kept wearing it. I kept smiling. I kept playing the part of the grateful, overwhelmed fiancé who couldn't believe her luck in landing such a wonderful man from such a distinguished family. I was not wrong about them. The smoking gun came 6 weeks before the wedding, delivered to my secure email by my head of security, James. It was a series of text messages between Marcus and his mother, forwarded to me by a source inside their household, the housekeeper, who had been quietly on my payroll for 8 months. Maria was a good woman, a grandmother from Guatemala who had worked for the Whitmores for 15 years. She had seen everything: the screaming matches, the financial panic, the parade of women Marcus brought to the house when his mother was away. When James approached her with my offer, $100,000 for information, plus help with her grandson's medical bills, she had accepted immediately. "They treat me like furniture," she had told James. "Like I don't exist. Like I don't see everything they do." "She's worth at least $500K from the AMP," Marcus had written. "Once we're married, I can get her to co-sign on the business loans. After that, it's just a matter of time before I can access everything." Helen's response had chilled me to the bone. "Remember, the prenup is key. Make her think she's protecting herself. We need her signature on those loan documents within the first month. The Patterson account is 3 weeks from default. Don't worry, Mom. She's so desperate to be loved, she'd sign anything I put in front of her." I had read those words in my corner office, looking out at the city skyline that I owned pieces of, and I had felt something inside me calcify into diamond. They thought I was desperate. They thought I was blind. They thought I was a mark. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The tears came later, in the privacy of my penthouse, with the curtains drawn and Prophet, my orange tabby, curled against my chest. I cried for the woman I had been, the one who had hoped against hope that this time would be different. I cried for the future I had imagined, the Sunday dinners and holiday traditions, and children who would grow up with a father who actually loved them. And then I dried my eyes and began to plan. The wedding planning took on a new dimension after that. Every decision I made was strategic. The venue? St. Michael's Cathedral, the most prestigious in the city, where every society wedding had been held for the past century. The guest list? 300 of the city's most influential people, including, crucially, the entire board of Whitmore Manufacturing and their parent company, Nexus Industries. I insisted on a live string quartet and a 20-piece band for the reception. I demanded imported flowers from 3 different countries. I hired the most sought-after photographer in the state and the most expensive caterer in the region. Every detail was designed to attract attention, to ensure that the city's elite would clear their calendars for what promised to be the social event of the season. Helen was delighted by my apparent extravagance. "Finally," she had said to Marcus. Maria forwarded me the message. "She's showing some ambition. Maybe there's hope for her after all." The cost? $200,000. Paid entirely from an account Marcus knew nothing about. He thought we were splitting expenses, that my savings were being drained. In reality, I was setting the most expensive trap in my life. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made my move. Through a series of shell companies that even my closest advisors couldn't trace, I acquired controlling interest in Nexus Industries, the company that held all of Whitmore Manufacturing's debt. The Whitmores owed Nexus $12 million, secured against their family home, their business assets, and Helen's precious vacation property in the Hamptons. The acquisition was complex. A hostile takeover disguised as a friendly investment, executed through 5 different holding companies across 3 jurisdictions. My legal team worked around the clock. My financial advisors questioned my sanity. But I knew what I was doing. When I walked into the Nexus Industries boardroom to reveal myself as the new majority shareholder, the faces around the table showed varying degrees of shock, fear, and, from Richard Morrison, the CEO, a kind of grudging respect. "Mrs. Blackwell," he had said carefully, "we had no idea you were interested in the manufacturing sector." "I'm interested in a lot of things, Mr. Morrison. Most of them people don't see coming." They had no idea that their new owner was the desperate nobody they were planning to fleece. The prenuptial agreement was my masterpiece. Marcus's lawyer, a bumbling fool named Patterson, who was clearly in Helen's pocket, had drafted what they thought was a document protecting their interests. I had my team review it, make small adjustments, and return it looking virtually unchanged. But buried in the legalese was a clause they had missed. Any assets acquired during the engagement or marriage would remain the sole property of the original owner. My engagement period acquisition of Nexus Industries? Entirely protected. Patterson never saw it coming. He was too busy congratulating himself on the clever provisions that would give Marcus access to my modest inheritance within 6 months of the wedding. He missed the counterweights my lawyers had installed, the clauses that would activate if the marriage failed, the provisions that protected assets he didn't even know existed. Marcus signed it without reading past the first page. His arrogance was my greatest weapon. "This is just a formality, baby," he had said, scrawling his signature across the bottom. "You know I don't care about your money." I had smiled and kissed his cheek and felt nothing but cold, clear purpose. Now, standing at that altar, watching the minutes tick by with no groom in sight, I felt an almost serene calm settle over me. This was not the fairy tale ending I had once dreamed of, but it would be an ending nonetheless, just not for me. Helen Whitmore rose from her seat in the front pew, her designer mother of the groom dress rustling like snake scales. She was a striking woman in her 60s, all sharp angles and sharper ambitions. I had once thought her elegant. Now I saw her for what she was, a predator in Chanel. Her dress was champagne-colored, carefully chosen to not quite compete with my white but to draw attention nonetheless. She had spent nearly as much on her outfit as I had spent on mine. Money I now knew the family couldn't afford, money that had probably come from the business accounts she and Marcus had been draining for years. "Everyone, please," she announced, her voice carrying through the cathedral with practiced authority. "There seems to be a small delay. I'm sure Marcus has simply been caught in traffic. You know how these things are." She laughed, and a few polite chuckles echoed back. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to her phone. She knew something. She was stalling. The guests were growing restless. I could see my college roommate, Sarah, trying to catch my eye from the third row, her face full of sympathy and confusion. My brother David sat rigid in his seat, hands clenched, already preparing to defend my honor. Elena, my executive assistant, had positioned herself near the exit, ready to execute whatever I needed at a moment's notice. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The guests grew restless. Children whined, men checked their watches. Women whispered behind their programs. The string quartet had cycled through their entire repertoire twice and was now simply repeating Pachelbel's canon with increasingly desperate energy. I stood perfectly still at the altar, my face composed into an expression of confused concern, the expression everyone expected from a jilted bride. Inside, I was counting the minutes, waiting for the perfect moment. Every second of delay was another nail in Helen's coffin, another witness to the disaster she had orchestrated. Finally, Helen's phone buzzed. I watched her read the message, watched her face cycle through emotions, relief, then calculation, then something that looked almost like glee. She composed herself and walked to the altar, positioning herself beside me like a concerned mother-in-law. "I'm so sorry, Victoria, dear," she said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Her hand found my arm in a grip that felt more possessive than comforting. It seems Marcus has had an emergency. He won't be able to make it today. The gasps rippled through the congregation. I stood perfectly still, my face carefully blank. What kind of emergency? A family matter, nothing you need to concern yourself with. Helen's smile was pure venom disguised as sympathy. I'm sure we can reschedule for next month. These things happen. A family matter. As if Amber's labor was a minor inconvenience, a scheduling conflict. As if the child being born at that very moment, Marcus's child, conceived while he was supposedly building a life with me, was nothing more than an administrative problem. But she wasn't looking at me anymore. She had spotted someone in the crowd, Richard Morrison, the CEO of Nexus Industries, and more importantly, to Helen, one of the most connected businessmen in the state. She had been trying to get a meeting with him for years, hoping to renegotiate the crushing debt terms that were slowly strangling Whitmore Manufacturing. Helen released my arm and glided toward Richard with the determination of a heat-seeking missile. I watched her intercept him near the back of the cathedral, her hand extended, her smile blinding. "Mr. Morrison, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Helen Whitmore, Marcus's mother. I've been trying to reach your office for months about our account." Richard's face was a study in discomfort. He was a portly man in his 60s, well-meaning but easily flustered. He had no idea how to handle this social ambush. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is hardly the time." "Nonsense. Since we're all here anyway, and my son has had this little emergency, perhaps we could use the time productively?" Helen gestured to the well-dressed crowd around them. "I see several of your board members are here. The Hendersons, the Carters, the Nguyens. Perhaps we could discuss the restructuring proposal I sent." The audacity of it still takes my breath away. Her son had just abandoned me at the altar, and her first instinct was to network, to leverage the disaster for business advantage, to use my humiliation as a backdrop for her own advancement. I watched this unfold with something approaching admiration for her audacity. My wedding had been hijacked, and she was using it as a networking opportunity. The guests were beginning to mill about, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Some had headed to the reception hall early, unwilling to waste a good open bar. Others lingered, sensing drama. Helen had gathered a small crowd now, board members, investors, society columnists who sensed a story. She was in her element, spinning the narrative. "Poor Victoria," she announced to the group, not even bothering to lower her voice. "She tried so hard, but Marcus, well, he finally came to his senses. You know how these things go. A man of his caliber, his potential, his connections, and she's just a school teacher. No family to speak of, no real assets. I think he realized he was settling." The laughter that followed was cruel and knowing. These were people who understood the calculus of social climbing, who measured worth in net worth. A school teacher marrying into the Whitmore family? How deliciously scandalous that it had fallen apart. I watched their faces, the smirks, the raised eyebrows, the knowing glances exchanged behind champagne flutes. These were the people I had built my empire to escape. The gatekeepers who decided who belonged and who didn't. The arbiters of social worth who had never worked a day in their lives but felt entitled to judge those who had. "I hear she paid for the whole wedding herself," someone murmured. "Drained her savings, I heard, desperate to lock him down." Can you blame her? Have you seen Marcus? And that trust fund? What trust fund? The Whitmores are mortgaged to the hilt. My husband says their company is 6 months from bankruptcy. Helen's smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Vicious rumors. Whitmore Manufacturing is stronger than ever. In fact, once we finalize our restructuring with Nexus Industries," she turned to Richard with predatory focus, "we'll be expanding into 3 new markets by next year." Richard shifted uncomfortably. He was sweating now, and I knew why. He had recognized me the moment he walked into the cathedral. He had been at the Nexus Industries board meeting last Friday, when I had revealed myself as the new majority shareholder. He had watched me dismantle the old guard's objections with surgical precision and announce my plans for aggressive restructuring of underperforming debt accounts. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew that Helen Whitmore had just made a catastrophic mistake. Poor Richard. He was a decent man, caught between professional discretion and the overwhelming urge to warn Helen that she was digging her own grave with every word. I could see the conflict playing across his face. The businessman who knew he should stay silent, the human being who wanted to stop the carnage. I watched Richard try to catch my eye, his expression pleading. I gave him a small nod. Not yet. Helen was still talking, still weaving her web of lies and delusions. The truth is, Victoria just wasn't right for Marcus. She came from nothing. No connections, no breeding, no understanding of how our world works. She thought she could buy her way in with her little inheritance. But money isn't everything, is it? The crowd tittered in agreement. Old money consensus. The nouveau riche could never truly belong. I tried to warn Marcus, Helen continued, warming to her audience. I told him, "Darling, she's pretty enough, but what does she bring to the table? A teacher's pension?" He's always been too kind-hearted for his own good. But today, finally, he saw the truth. He called me this morning and said, "Mother, I can't do this. I can't marry a woman who would hold me back." Every word was a gift. Every insult, every condescension, every cruel dismissal, all of it recorded by the phones already out, all of it witnessed by 300 of the city's most connected people, all of it building the foundation for what came next. I had heard enough. "Mrs. Whitmore." My voice cut through the cathedral like a blade. The whispers stopped. Every head turned toward me, still standing at the altar in my wedding dress, still holding my bouquet of peonies. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Helen's smile was condescending as I approached. "There's nothing to misunderstand, dear. Sometimes these things simply aren't meant to be. You'll find someone more suitable for your station. Perhaps another teacher? Someone who shares your modest expectations?" The crowd parted for me as I walked down the aisle. Not toward the exit, but toward Helen and her captive audience. I stopped directly in front of Richard Morrison, whose face had gone the color of old parchment. My heels clicked against the marble floor with each step. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent cathedral like a countdown. I could feel every eye on me, the curious, the sympathetic, the gleeful, all of them waiting to see how the abandoned bride would handle her humiliation. They had no idea what they were about to witness. "Mr. Morrison," I said pleasantly, "I believe we met last Friday, in the Nexus Industries boardroom." The silence that followed was absolute. Helen laughed uncertainly. "Victoria, what are you talking about? You've never been to—" "The acquisition was finalized at 3:47 p.m., I continued, ignoring her. 47% controlling interest, purchased through Jade Mountain Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Blackwell Enterprises, which is wholly owned by Victoria Blackwell." I smiled. "That would be me." Richard Morrison closed his eyes like a man accepting his execution. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I apologize. I should have intervened sooner." "Her?" Helen's voice had gone shrill. "She's a teacher. She drives a Honda. She lives in a walk-up apartment in—" "I believe the term you used was desperate nobody," I interrupted, "and school teacher with no assets." "That's interesting, because according to the financial disclosure I filed with the SEC last week, my net worth is approximately $53 million. 54, if you count the value of Nexus Industries." I paused. "Which, as I mentioned, I now own." The color drained from Helen's face, like water from a broken vase. Around us, I could hear phones being pulled out, frantic Googling, whispered exclamations of shock. The Society columnist was typing furiously. Someone in the crowd said, "Oh my God," and someone else said, "Victoria Blackwell. That's the Blackwell Holdings." "Victoria Blackwell?" And suddenly, everyone was talking at once, a tide of realization washing over the congregation. That's not possible, Helen stammered. We checked. We investigated. You're nobody. You're nothing. You investigated a cover story, I corrected. One I created specifically because I was tired of men like your son seeing me as a bank account instead of a person. I wanted to know if Marcus could love Victoria the teacher. I let the smile fade from my face. He couldn't. He never did. Richard Morrison stepped forward, his courage apparently bolstered by the revelation. Mrs. Whitmore, I should inform you that your company's debt restructuring proposal has been reassessed. Given the recent change in ownership at Nexus Industries, all accounts are under review. Helen grabbed his arm. Richard, please. We've been partners for 20 years. Surely we can discuss. The decision isn't mine anymore. Richard gently removed her hand from his sleeve. The new owner has final authority over all debt accounts. He turned to me with something like respect in his eyes. Mrs. Blackwell, how would you like to proceed? I looked at Helen Whitmore, at the woman who had called me desperate, who had schemed to steal my money, who had raised a son to be a predator and aimed him at women like me. First, I said, I'd like everyone to stay seated. The ceremony isn't over yet. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the cathedral's speaker system, a feature Daniela had installed for the DJ during the reception. The Bluetooth, paired with a soft chime that echoed through the sacred space. What are you doing? Helen demanded. I ignored her and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring. Mom, is it done? Did she cry? His voice filled the cathedral, broadcast through every speaker, reaching every ear. 300 guests heard him. The board of Nexus Industries heard him. The society columnist heard him, her phone recording every word. The echo was perfect. Every syllable bouncing off the vaulted ceilings, filling the sacred space with his casual cruelty. I watched Helen's face as she realized what was happening, watched the horror bloom across her features as her son's voice condemned them both. Hello, Marcus, I said. There was a pause. Then, Victoria, why are you... Is this on speaker? More than speaker. The entire congregation can hear you. All 300 guests. Your business partners, your mother's social circle, the board of the company your family owes $12 million to. I let that sink in. I believe you were about to explain why you're not at our wedding? I could hear panic building in his voice. You can't just... Mom, what is happening? Helen lunged for my phone, but Richard Morrison stepped between us, blocking her with surprising firmness. I think we'd all like to hear this explanation, Mrs. Whitmore. In the background of the call, I heard a woman's voice. Marcus? Who is that? Is that her? Shut up, Amber, Marcus hissed. Then, trying to recover, Victoria, baby, I can explain. There was an emergency, a family thing. I was going to call you. Was the emergency named Amber? I asked. The woman whose voice I just heard? The one you've been seeing for the past 8 months? The one who's currently pregnant with your child? The gasp that went through the cathedral was like a physical wave. Helen made a sound like a dying animal. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The shattering sound was almost comically perfect, a punctuation mark to the destruction of everything Helen had built. That's not who told you. Your housekeeper, I said. Maria. She's been very informative. She forwarded me your text messages, Marcus. All of them. Including the ones where you and your mother discussed how to drain Victoria's inheritance and dump her after the loan documents are signed. Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Then Amber's voice, sharp and accusatory. You told me she was rich. You said once you married her and got the money, you'd leave her and we'd be together. You said she was worth millions. She's a teacher, Marcus screamed. She's supposed to be broke. How was I supposed to know? Know what? I interrupted. That I'm the owner and CEO of Blackwell Holdings? That I've spent the last 6 months quietly acquiring your family's debt? That as of 9 a.m. this morning, I hold the mortgage on your mother's house, the lien on your family business, and the note on every credit line your family has ever opened? Another pause. Then Marcus's voice, suddenly very small. What? I told you I was a teacher, Marcus. I never told you that was my only job. I looked at Helen, who had started to sway on her feet. The woman your mother just introduced to 300 of her closest friends and business associates as a desperate nobody? I'm her landlord. I own her house. I own her company. And as of this moment, I own every financial asset your family has ever accumulated. You can't, that's not legal. We had a prenup that protects assets acquired during the engagement or marriage, I confirmed, which includes Nexus Industries, purchased 3 weeks ago. My lawyers wrote that document, Marcus. Your lawyer just signed where we told him to. I paused. Did you really think I would let you steal from me? The cathedral had become a courtroom. Every eye was fixed on me. Every phone was recording. Helen had collapsed into a pew, her face gray, her hands shaking. The guests watched with the hungry attention of spectators at a public execution, which in a way, this was. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice carrying through the speakers with perfect clarity. I am calling in all loans owed by Whitmore Manufacturing and the Whitmore Family Trust, effective immediately. You have 30 days to pay $12 million in full, or I will begin foreclosure proceedings on every property, every asset, and every holding your family owns. You can't do this, Helen screamed from her pew. I'll sue. I'll destroy you. I know people. You know people who are currently watching you humiliate yourself, I said, gesturing to the crowd. You know board members who are already calculating how to distance themselves from you. You know society columnists who are going to make this the lead story in tomorrow's paper. I looked at the journalist, who gave me a small nod. You know exactly no one who can help you now. Marcus was still on the phone, his breathing ragged. Victoria, please. We can work this out. I love you. I made a mistake. The baby, Amber, it didn't mean anything. You're the one I want. We can still get married. We can forget this ever happened. I let his words hang in the air, let everyone hear the naked desperation in them. Then I laughed. Forget? I don't think so, Marcus. I think this moment is going to be remembered for a very long time. I looked around at the witnesses, at the evidence being recorded on dozens of phones. I think your name is going to become a cautionary tale. I think mothers are going to tell their daughters about the man who tried to con the wrong woman and lost everything. Please, goodbye, Marcus. I ended the call. The silence that followed was broken only by Helen's quiet sobbing. I stood in the center of the cathedral, still wearing my wedding dress, still holding my flowers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 18 months, free. Richard Morrison approached me carefully, like one might approach a lioness after a kill. Mrs. Blackwell, I want to assure you that Nexus Industries will fully cooperate with whatever restructuring you have planned. The Whitmore accounts will be handled according to your specifications. I'll send a memo to the board Monday morning, I said. For now, I believe there's a reception hall full of food and an open bar that someone needs to enjoy. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. The ceremony may be canceled, but the party isn't. I paid for it. I intend to get my money's worth. Anyone who would like to join me for dinner and dancing is welcome. Consider it a celebration of narrow escapes. The laughter that followed was different from before. It was shocked, admiring, and just a little bit afraid. These people had come to witness a wedding. They had stayed for a revolution. As I walked toward the reception hall, I passed Helen Whitmore, still collapsed in her pew. She looked up at me with something beyond hatred, recognition perhaps. Recognition that she had badly, catastrophically underestimated her prey. You ruined us, she whispered. Everything we built, everything we worked for. I stopped, looked down at her. No, Helen, you ruined yourselves. I just made sure everyone watched. I continued walking, my heels clicking against the marble floor, my wedding dress trailing. Behind me, like a victory banner. Behind me, I could hear the guests beginning to move, to murmur, to follow. The story was already being told, retold, embellished. By morning, everyone would know. The desperate nobody had just become the most talked about woman in the city. And I was just getting started. The reception hall glittered like a jewelry box, and I had never felt more alive. 300 guests had followed me from the cathedral. Their shock transformed into morbid fascination. They clutched champagne flutes and whispered behind manicured hands, watching me like I was an exotic animal who had just devoured its trainer. I didn't mind. Let them watch. Let them learn. The transition from failed wedding to impromptu celebration had a surreal quality. The band, initially confused, had rallied magnificently, playing upbeat jazz instead of the romantic ballads we had rehearsed. The waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres as if nothing unusual had happened. The flowers still bloomed, the candles still flickered, and the ice sculpture of two swans, now mockingly inappropriate, continued to drip slowly in the center of the room. Daniela, my wedding planner, materialized at my elbow. Her professional composure had cracked slightly, revealing something like awe underneath. "Mrs. Blackwell, Victoria, what would you like me to do? The band is asking about the first dance, and the caterer wants to know about the seating arrangements, and the photographer—" "Tell the band to play whatever they like," I said. "Move the head table settings. Remove Marcus's place and his family's. Add seats for anyone from the Nexus Industries board who would like to join me. And tell the photographer to keep shooting. I want every moment of this evening documented." "The cake," Daniela added hesitantly. "It has both your names on it. The fondant topper is you and Marcus." I smiled. "Leave it. I'll deal with the cake personally." She hurried off, and I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations that felt more like condolences and condolences that felt more like congratulations. The social calculus of the room had shifted dramatically in the past hour. People who had barely acknowledged me during the engagement were suddenly eager to be seen speaking with me. People who had laughed at Helen's cruel introduction now stumbled over themselves to assure me they had never believed a word of it. I smiled and nodded and made mental notes of every face. I had an excellent memory for betrayal. The Nguyen family approached me first. David and Patricia, old money from the railroad days, with their daughter Michelle, who had been one of my bridesmaids. Michelle looked mortified. Her parents looked calculating. "Victoria, darling, what an extraordinary turn of events," Patricia said, air-kissing both my cheeks. "I always knew there was something special about you, that quiet confidence, that mysterious quality." I told David, "Just last week, that girl is going places." "Did you?" I said mildly. "Funny. I recall you telling Helen Whitmore that she should check my credit score before letting Marcus propose." Patricia's smile froze. David suddenly found the chandelier very interesting. Michelle looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. I was merely concerned for everyone involved." "Of course you were." I patted her arm. "Enjoy the reception, Patricia. The shrimp cocktail is excellent. I selected it myself." I moved on, leaving them to stew in their embarrassment. This was petty, perhaps, but I had earned a little pettiness. 18 months of smiling while people looked down on me. 18 months of pretending not to notice the snide comments, the dismissive glances, the assumption that I was somehow less than because I didn't flaunt my wealth. Tonight, I was done pretending. I found Richard Morrison near the bar, nursing a scotch with the desperate focus of a man who had seen too much. He straightened when he saw me approaching, nearly spilling his drink in his haste to appear professional. "Mrs. Blackwell, I want to reiterate my complete support for whatever direction you choose to take with the Whitmore accounts. My team will have a full financial assessment on your desk by Wednesday, and I've already instructed our legal department to begin reviewing the loan documents for any actionable irregularities." "Irregularities?" I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "What kind of irregularities?" Richard glanced around, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Between us? The Whitmores have been playing fast and loose with their financials for years. Inflated asset valuations, unreported liabilities, possible embezzlement from the company pension fund. We've suspected it for a while. but without majority shareholder pressure to investigate. He shrugged. Now that you're in control, we can finally dig into it properly. Embezzlement. I let the word roll around my mouth like a fine wine. That sounds like something that might interest the authorities. It very well might, Richard agreed, if someone were to file a complaint. I smiled and clinked my glass against his. Richard, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. The evening progressed like a fever dream. The band played, the guests danced, and I held court at the head table like a queen surveying her domain. The seat next to me, Marcus's seat, remained conspicuously empty, a monument to betrayal. I had Daniela place his untouched place setting there anyway. The fine china, the crystal glassware, the carefully folded napkin with our intertwined initials. Let everyone see what he had thrown away. Around 10 o'clock, the whispers started to shift. Phones buzzed with incoming messages. Guests clustered in corners, sharing screens, their faces illuminated by the glow of breaking news. I already knew what they were seeing. I had timed it perfectly. The first headline appeared on the society pages. Wedding disaster. Groom no-show, exposed as fraud by secret billionaire bride. That was the gentle version. By the time the mainstream news picked it up, it had evolved. Tech heiress traps gold-digging fiancé in elaborate wedding sting. And my personal favorite, from a tabloid that had clearly spoken to someone in the cathedral. Eat the rich? She ate him. Jilted bride reveals fortune, destroys groom's family in epic altar revenge. The story had gone viral. Of course it had. It was too delicious not to share. The arrogant family brought low, the underestimated woman revealed as a secret powerhouse, the live broadcast confession, the complete and utter destruction of a man who had tried to steal from the wrong person. It was a modern fairy tale, and I was both the princess and the dragon. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for hours. Messages from colleagues, competitors, old friends, estranged relatives, journalists seeking comment. I ignored them all except one. A text from James, my head of security. News crews gathering outside the venue. Police scanner traffic mentions possible fraud investigation opening Monday. Whitmore family lawyer requesting emergency meeting. How do you want me to handle it? I type back. Let the news crews wait. Tell the lawyer I'll speak with him through my legal team. And James, nice work on the housekeeper. Give Maria a bonus. Already done, boss. She's on her way to visit family in Portugal with a very generous severance package. I smiled and slipped the phone back into my clutch. Everything was proceeding according to plan. At 11, I finally addressed the cake. It was a magnificent creation, 5 tiers of vanilla bean and raspberry, decorated with sugar flowers and edible gold leaf, topped with a fondant sculpture of a bride and groom in elegant embrace. Our names were written in flowing script on the bottom tier. Victoria and Marcus, forever. I picked up the cake knife, sterling silver, custom engraved with our wedding date, and tapped it against my champagne glass. The room fell silent. I know this isn't the wedding any of us expected, I said, my voice carrying through the hushed reception hall. But I think it's important to honor the occasion nonetheless. After all, this is still a celebration. It's just not a celebration of a marriage. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Today was supposed to be the beginning of my life with Marcus Whitmore. Instead, it's the end of my life as Victoria, the teacher, the desperate nobody, the woman who didn't know her place. I looked around at the assembled faces, some sympathetic, some ashamed, some simply hungry for drama. I spent 18 months pretending to be less than I am because I wanted to be loved for myself. I learned some valuable lessons. I raised the knife and, with one clean stroke, cut off the fondant groom. He tumbled down the side of the cake, leaving the bride standing alone on top. Lesson 1. Never trust a man who asks about your inheritance on the 3rd date. Lesson 2. Always have your own lawyers review any document you sign. And lesson 3. I plucked the sugar groom from where he had landed and crushed him between my fingers. Never underestimate a woman with nothing to lose, because you never know what she might actually have. Applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. Whatever reservations these people had about me, whatever judgments they had made, they couldn't deny the spectacle. They couldn't deny the triumph. I cut the first slice of cake and ate it standing up in my wedding dress, surrounded by 300 witnesses to my transformation. It was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. By midnight, the reception had wound down. Guests trickled out, drunk on champagne and gossip, already composing the stories they would tell tomorrow. I stood by the grand windows overlooking the city, watching the lights glitter like fallen stars. My city, my empire, my victory. Daniela approached one last time, her tablet clutched to her chest. The final expenses have been tallied. With the ceremony cut short, we actually came in under budget. The caterer is asking about the leftover food. Should they pack it for donation? Yes. Send everything to St. Mary's Shelter on 14th Street. I paused. And Daniela? Thank you for everything. You handled today beautifully. Mrs. Blackwell. Daniela hesitated. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Did you know? The whole time you were planning the wedding, did you know it would end like this? I considered the question. Had I known? I had suspected. I had prepared. But there had been a part of me, a small, stubborn, hopelessly romantic part, that had hoped I was wrong. That had hoped Marcus would prove himself worthy. That had hoped the wedding would go forward and the prenup would just be insurance against a fear that never materialized. I knew it was possible, I finally said. I planned for the worst while hoping for the best. When you've spent your whole life being judged for your money, you learn to protect yourself. But no. I looked out at the city again. I didn't want this. I wanted a wedding, a marriage, a partner who saw me, not my bank account. I wanted the fairy tale. I'm sorry, Daniela said softly. Don't be. I turned back to her with a smile that was only slightly bitter. The fairy tale was a lie, but this, I gestured to the beautiful reception hall, the remnants of my ruined wedding, the evidence of my spectacular revenge. This is real. This is power. And power, unlike love, never betrays you. I left the reception hall just after 1 a.m, still wearing my wedding dress. A small army of news vans had gathered outside, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like supplicants awaiting divine transmission. Reporters shouted questions as James escorted me to my waiting car. Not the modest Honda I had driven during my engagement, but the Aston Martin I had kept garaged for 18 months. I didn't answer their questions. I didn't need to. The story had already told itself. As the car pulled away, I allowed myself one moment of grief. One silent acknowledgement of the future I had lost. Lazy Sunday mornings with a man who loved me. Holidays with a family I could call my own. The simple joy of partnership with someone who wanted nothing from me but my presence. That future was gone now, shattered like Helen's champagne glass on the cathedral floor. But I had survived worse. I had built an empire from nothing, buried my father's debts and his dreams both. Learned to be strong when the world demanded softness, and soft when it demanded strength. I would survive this too. And the Whitmores? They would not. I pulled out my phone and composed a text to my legal team. Monday morning, 9 a.m., we're opening an investigation into Whitmore Manufacturing's financial practices. Coordinate with Richard Morrison at Nexus and prepare the foreclosure paperwork. I want it ready to file the moment they miss a payment. The response came instantly. Understood. Anything else? I thought for a moment. Then I typed, find out everything you can about a woman named Amber, Marcus's mistress. I want to know her story. All of it. On it. I tucked the phone away and leaned back against the leather seat, watching the city lights blur past. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, I would start dismantling the Whitmore empire piece by piece, brick by brick, until nothing remained but dust and cautionary tales. But tonight, I would go home to my penthouse apartment. The real one, with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the private elevator and the closet full of clothes I hadn't worn in 18 months. I would take off this wedding dress and hang it in the back of my closet, a trophy of war. I would pour myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than Marcus's engagement ring. And I would sleep peacefully for the first time since I had said yes to a proposal built on lies. The desperate nobody was dead. Long live the queen. The morning after my wedding, I woke to find myself famous. Not famous like a celebrity. Famous like a natural disaster. My name was everywhere. Newspapers, websites, talk shows, social media platforms I had never even heard of. The wedding video had been uploaded to YouTube by someone with a phone and had already accumulated 4 million views. News anchors discussed my epic revenge with barely concealed glee. Opinion writers debated whether I was a feminist icon or a ruthless villain. I sipped my coffee on my penthouse balcony, 42 floors above the city, and read the coverage with clinical detachment. The facts were mostly accurate, though the interpretations varied wildly. Some outlets painted Marcus as a victim of entrapment. A poor lamb led to slaughter by a scheming spider woman. Others celebrated my strategic genius, calling it the most satisfying wedding fail in history. A few focused on Helen's humiliation, capturing screenshots of her face at the moment of revelation and turning them into memes. The most interesting article came from a financial publication which had done its homework. Victoria Blackwell, the Invisible Titan, read the headline. The reporter had traced my corporate holdings, mapped my investment portfolio, interviewed former colleagues who described me as brilliant, ruthless, and the last person you want to cross. It included a timeline of my rise from orphaned college student to multimillionaire CEO, complete with footnotes and quarterly revenue graphs. By 10 a.m., my inbox contained 473 unread messages. By noon, it had crossed 1,000. I ignored them all. At 2 p.m., my personal line rang, the one that only 8 people in the world had access to. I checked the caller ID, James, head of security. Tell me. The Whitmore situation is developing faster than expected. His voice was calm, professional, exactly why I paid him what I paid him. Marcus tried to board a flight to the Caymans this morning. We flagged his passport with the authorities last night as a precaution. He was detained at the airport and is currently being questioned about potential financial crimes. The Caymans. I set down my coffee cup. He was running. Looks that way. The girlfriend, Amber, was with him. She's not being detained, but she's not happy. Made quite a scene at the airport. Something about broken promises and stolen futures. And Helen? She's been making phone calls all morning, trying to reach her lawyer, her banker, her society friends. No one's picking up. James paused. She tried to call Nexus Industries directly. Richard Morrison's assistant told her that all communications regarding Whitmore manufacturing accounts need to go through your legal team. Excellent. I stood and walked inside, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. What about the house? The business? The foreclosure notices will be served this afternoon. They have 30 days to pay in full, as you specified. The business accounts have been frozen pending the fraud investigation. Preliminary evidence suggests significant irregularities in their pension fund management and loan applications. Significant enough for criminal charges? The forensic accountants are saying yes. Conservative estimate, 3 to 5 years for Marcus if he's convicted. Helen's involvement is harder to prove, but she's definitely exposed to civil liability. I closed my eyes and let the information wash over me. 3 to 5 years. For trying to steal from me, for treating me like a mark, for laughing while his mother called me a desperate nobody, for making me believe, even for a moment, that I had found something real. It wasn't enough. It would never be. Enough to fill the hollow space where my hope used to live. But it was a start. Keep me updated, I said. And James, the girlfriend, Amber? I asked for information on her last night. What did you find? Amber Sullivan, 26 years old. She grew up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18, worked as a waitress and retail clerk while putting herself through community college. She met Marcus at a nightclub about 11 months ago. According to her social media, she believed he was single and wealthy and planning to leave his loveless relationship for her. She thought he was going to marry her. It appears so. She's 7 months pregnant. The baby is definitely his. We obtained medical records confirming paternity. I was quiet for a long moment. Amber Sullivan. A different woman might have hated her, might have lumped her in with Marcus and Helen as part of the enemy conspiracy. But I had been paying attention. I had read the text messages. I knew how Marcus operated. He had told Amber the same lies he told me. He had made her the same promises. The only difference was that she had believed him longer, trusted him deeper, given him something I never had, a child. She wasn't my enemy. She was another victim. Keep monitoring her situation, I said finally. Let me know if she needs help. Help? James's voice carried a note of surprise. With respect, boss, she was sleeping with your fiancé. She was being conned by my fiancé, I corrected. Just like I was. The only difference is that I had the resources to protect myself. She doesn't. I paused. Everyone deserves a chance to choose better, James. She didn't know what she was choosing. Understood. If he disagreed, he was professional enough not to show it. I'll keep you informed. I ended the call and stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by all the things money could buy. The priceless art, the designer furniture, the view of a city I could purchase block by block if I wanted to. None of it meant anything without someone to share it with. That was the cruel joke of wealth. It could protect you from almost everything except loneliness. But self-pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now, when there was so much work to do. I showered, dressed in my most intimidating power suit, charcoal Armani, razor-sharp lines, heels that added 3 inches to my already considerable height, and headed to Blackwell Holdings headquarters. The office building stood 42 stories tall in the heart of the financial district, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun like a beacon. I had purchased it 3 years ago when Blackwell Holdings outgrew our original space and had personally designed the executive floor to my specifications. Clean lines, natural light, minimal decoration, except for a few pieces of art that reminded me where I had come from. The elevator required a biometric scan to reach my floor. The doors opened onto a reception area staffed by Elena, my executive assistant, who had been with me since I was operating out of a one-room office with secondhand furniture. Good afternoon, Mrs. Blackwell. Elena's face was carefully neutral, but I could see the questions burning behind her eyes. Your 2 o'clock is waiting in the conference room. I've also prepared a summary of media inquiries, board member communications, and legal updates. Thank you, Elena. I accepted the tablet she offered. Has anyone from the board expressed concerns about the publicity? Several members called to express support. A few called to express concerns about company image. One suggested that perhaps a quieter approach might have been advisable. Let me guess, Richardson. Richardson. Elena's lips twitched. I told him you would be happy to discuss image management at the next quarterly meeting. Perfect. I skimmed the tablet's contents as I walked toward the conference room. The legal updates. Anything I should know before this meeting? The Whitmore foreclosure documents have been served. Marcus Whitmore remains in custody, pending a bail hearing tomorrow morning. Helen Whitmore has retained counsel, who has already sent a letter threatening defamation action. Defamation? I almost laughed. For telling the truth in front of witnesses? The letter specifically cites emotional distress and reputational harm caused by your deliberate and malicious public statements. Elena's tone made clear what she thought of this legal strategy. Your attorneys have already responded, pointing out that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and that Mrs. Whitmore may want to consult different counsel before proceeding. Excellent. I paused at the conference room door. One more thing. I need you to arrange a meeting with someone named Amber Sullivan. She was Marcus's other relationship. Be gentle in your approach. She's pregnant and probably terrified right now. Tell her I want to talk, nothing more. She can bring a lawyer if she wants. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded. I'll make the arrangements. The conference room held 6 of my most trusted advisors. My CFO, my head of legal, my chief strategist, and 3 senior vice presidents whose divisions would be most affected by the Nexus Industries acquisition. They stood when I entered, their faces a mixture of respect and curiosity. Sit, please. I took my place at the head of the table. I know you all have questions about this weekend's events. I'll address them briefly, and then we need to focus on business. I summarized the situation in clinical terms. The failed wedding, the exposure of Marcus's scheme, the acquisition of Nexus Industries, and the subsequent leverage over Whitmore Manufacturing. I did not mention the heartbreak. I did not mention the betrayal. Those were personal matters, irrelevant to the task at hand. The media attention will fade within a week, I concluded. What matters now is how we handle the Nexus acquisition and the Whitmore accounts. Richard Morrison is being cooperative. I want to ensure that cooperation continues. The board is concerned about perception, said Thomas Liu, my chief strategist. Some members feel that the public nature of the confrontation could make Blackwell Holdings appear vindictive, unprofessional. Do you feel that way, Thomas? He met my eyes steadily. I feel that you have always made decisions that benefit this company and its stakeholders. If the board has concerns, they can raise them through proper channels. What I need to know is whether this acquisition is about business or about revenge. It was a fair question. Thomas had been with me for 8 years and had earned the right to ask it. Both, I said honestly. Nexus Industries is a sound acquisition that expands our manufacturing portfolio and eliminates a competitor. The Whitmore accounts are a separate matter. They tried to defraud me personally, and I will pursue every legal avenue available to recover damages and ensure they face consequences. But I will not let personal feelings compromise the company's strategic interests. Nexus will be integrated according to standard protocol. The Whitmore situation will be handled by our legal team, not our business operations. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I have no concerns. Anyone else? Silence. My executives exchanged glances but said nothing. Good. I pulled up the Nexus financial projections on the conference room screen. Then let's talk about Q3 revenue targets and the manufacturing integration timeline. We have work to do. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the time it ended, my executives had their marching orders. The acquisition timeline had been accelerated by 2 weeks, and I had a clear path forward. Business as usual, or as close to usual as possible when your face was on the front page of every newspaper in the city. I worked late that night, as I always did when I needed to quiet my mind. The office building emptied around me, floor after floor going dark, until only the cleaning crew remained. I reviewed contracts, signed approvals, drafted memos. The rhythm of work was soothing, predictable, controllable. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Amber Sullivan will meet with you tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the address in your calendar. She's bringing her sister as support. She asked me to tell you that she's not interested in your money. I smiled slightly. Good for her. At midnight, another text. This one from James. Marcus Whitmore made bail. He's out, but under travel restrictions. Helen Whitmore collapsed this evening. Suspected heart episode. She's been hospitalized, condition stable. Do you want me to do anything? I considered for a long moment, then typed, no. Keep monitoring, but take no action. I want this to play out naturally. I didn't wish Helen dead. That would be too easy, too quick. I wanted her to watch everything she had built crumble around her. I wanted her to live with the knowledge that she had destroyed herself through her own arrogance, her own cruelty, her own determination to see me as less than human. Death was an escape. I wasn't feeling that generous. The night passed in a blur of spreadsheets and legal documents. At 3 a.m., I finally admitted defeat and called for my car. The city streets were empty at this hour, the neon signs flickering in the darkness, the occasional taxi prowling for late-night fares. I watched it all pass by from behind tinted windows, this kingdom I had built from nothing. Tomorrow, I would meet Marcus's mistress. I would continue dismantling his family's empire. I would navigate the media circus and the board politics and the 1,000 small crises that came with running a multi-million-dollar company. But tonight, in the quiet of my car, I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything I had lost. The dream of being loved for myself. The hope that Marcus was different. The future I had imagined, so careful and so naive. I had won. I knew that. The wedding had been a trap, and I had sprung it perfectly. Marcus would face justice. Helen would face ruin. Everyone who had laughed at me, dismissed me, underestimated me. They would remember this day for the rest of their lives. But victory, I was learning, did not feel the way I had expected. It felt empty. It felt like the space where love should have been. The meeting with Amber Sullivan took place in a small cafe on the west side of the city, far from the financial district and its prying eyes. I arrived first, ordered tea, and chose a table in the corner where we could speak privately. She was late. I didn't mind. When she finally appeared in the doorway, I barely recognized her from the photos James had provided. The glamorous mistress who had posed in designer clothes on Marcus's arm was gone. In her place stood a visibly pregnant young woman in a cheap maternity dress, her face bare of makeup, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying recently. She spotted me and froze. For a moment, I thought she might bolt. No, then something hardened in her expression. Pride, perhaps, or defiance. And she walked toward my table with her chin held high. Mrs. Blackwell. Ms. Sullivan, thank you for coming. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Please, sit. Can I order you anything? Water's fine. She lowered herself carefully into the chair, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. My sister is waiting outside. She didn't think this was a good idea. And yet you came anyway. I wanted to see you. Amber met my eyes directly. I wanted to understand why you did what you did. To Marcus? To me. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't know about you, not at first. He told me he was single, that he was working on building his family's business, that he wanted to share his success with someone who understood him. By the time I found out about the engagement, I was already... She touched her belly again. He said he was going to leave you. He said the wedding was just for show, to keep his mother happy, that he would divorce you within 6 months and we would be together. And you believed him. I loved him. The words came out like a confession. I know that sounds stupid now. I know what he is. But I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because my whole life, nobody ever chose me first, and he made me feel like I mattered. I studied her for a long moment. She was young, so young, and she had the look of someone who had been fighting uphill battles since birth. The foster care system, the minimum wage jobs, the community college courses squeezed between shifts. She wasn't so different from the woman I might have become if circumstances had been even slightly less kind. I'm not here to punish you, Amber. She blinked. You're not? No. I sipped my tea. You're not my enemy. You were a pawn, just like I was. Marcus used us both. He just used us differently. I had money he wanted to steal. You had vulnerability he wanted to exploit. Neither of us deserved what he did. But I slept with your fiancé. You slept with a man who lied to you about being available. That's not the same thing as choosing to betray someone. I set down my cup. I'm not saying this to be noble. I'm saying it because it's true. I've spent the last 18 months pretending to be someone I'm not, hiding my money, hiding my power, trying to find out if a man could love me for myself. Marcus failed that test. But you? You weren't taking the test. You were just another person he was lying to. Amber's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away angrily, as if ashamed of the weakness. Then why did you want to meet me? Because I want to know what you're planning to do now. What I'm planning. She laughed bitterly. I'm 7 months pregnant with the child of a man who's probably going to prison. I have no savings, no job, no family except my sister, who can barely support herself. I was planning to raise this baby in the life Marcus promised me. Nice house, financial security, 2 parents who loved each other. Now I'm planning to figure out how to survive. I can help with that. She stiffened. I told your assistant, I'm not interested in your money. I heard you, but I'm offering anyway. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table. This is a proposal. You don't have to accept it, and there are no strings attached either way. But I want you to read it before you decide. Amber looked at the folder like it might bite her. Slowly, she opened it. The documents inside detailed a comprehensive support package. Full medical coverage for her pregnancy and delivery, a 2-year living stipend while she finished her degree, job placement assistance afterward, and a trust fund for the baby's education. In exchange, I asked for nothing. No interviews, no statements, no public appearances, just a signed acknowledgement that she had received the offer and made her choice freely. Why? Amber's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Because I know what it's like to have nothing, I said quietly. My father died when I was 19, drowning in debt he never told me about. I had to drop out of college, work 3 jobs, figure out how to survive on my own in a world that doesn't give second chances to people who can't afford them. I built everything I have through luck and ruthlessness and the willingness to destroy anyone who got in my way. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But that's not who I want to be. Not entirely. I believe in consequences. Marcus and Helen will face theirs. But I also believe in mercy. In not punishing people for mistakes that weren't really theirs to make. You didn't choose this situation. Your child didn't choose this situation. I have the power to make both your lives a little easier. And I've learned that power is only meaningful if you use it for something besides destruction. Amber stared at me for a long time. I could see her wrestling with it, the suspicion ingrained by years of disappointment, the fear that this was another trap, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this wreckage. There's really no catch? There's really no catch. Except, decline, it doesn't change anything else. Marcus will still face charges. The Whitmore family will still face foreclosure. Your decision won't affect any of that. Then why? Because it's the right thing to do, I said simply. And because someone should have helped me when I was in your position. No one did. I had to save myself. But that doesn't mean I want anyone else to go through what I went through. Amber closed the folder, her hands trembling slightly. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. My contact information is in there. Call when you're ready, whatever you decide. She stood, clutching the folder to her chest like a lifeline. At the door, she turned back. Mrs. Blackwell? Yes? He said you were cold, calculating, that you didn't have a heart. She swallowed hard. He was wrong. I smiled, but it felt hollow. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just better at hiding it than he thought. She left. I sat alone in the cafe, surrounded by the quiet clatter of dishes and the murmur of other people's conversations, and wondered if what I had said was true. Did I have a heart? Or had I just learned to simulate one when it was strategically useful? The question troubled me more than I wanted to admit. The following week passed in a blur of legal proceedings, board meetings, and media management. Marcus's bail conditions confined him to the city while the investigation continued. Helen was released from the hospital, but immediately received the foreclosure notice. She had 30 days to produce $12 million or lose everything. The Whitmore manufacturing investigation expanded as forensic accountants discovered layer after layer of financial irregularities. Through it all, I maintained a public silence. My lawyers spoke for me, my executives handled the business operations. I remained in my corner office, watching the dominoes fall one by one. On the 10th day after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. Elena appeared in my doorway, her expression carefully neutral. There's a Marcus Whitmore here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. Security is prepared to escort him out. My heart didn't skip a beat. My hands didn't tremble. I had trained myself too well for that. Send him in. Are you sure? I can have James present if... I'm sure, Elena, but yes. Have James stand by, just in case. Marcus walked into my office looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 days. The polish was gone, the expensive suit replaced by wrinkled khakis, the confident stride reduced to a shuffle. He had dark circles under his eyes and at least 3 days of stubble on his jaw. I did not offer him a seat. Victoria, his voice cracked on my name. Please, I need to talk to you. Then talk. He looked around the office, at the walls of glass, the city sprawling below us, the visible markers of power he had thought he could steal. I never meant for it to go this far. You have to believe me. Mom pushed me into it. She said we needed the money, said you were our only option, said that I was too desperate for love to see what you really were. I kept my voice level. She was almost right. I did love you. The words tumbled out, desperate and pathetic. Not at first, maybe, but later. When we were together, when you laughed at my jokes, when you fell asleep on my shoulder during movies, I started to actually feel something. If things had been different, if we hadn't needed the money so badly, if I hadn't been useful to you, you wouldn't have looked at me twice. That's not... Don't. The single word cut through his protest like a blade. Don't stand in my office and lie to me. Not now. Not after everything. He fell silent, his shoulders slumping. You want to know something interesting, Marcus? I installed monitoring software on every device you used during our relationship. I have copies of every text you sent, every email, every search query. I know about the gambling debts you hid from your mother. I know about the escort services you charged to dummy credit cards. I know about the 3 other women you were sleeping with besides Amber, the paralegal, the yoga instructor, and your old college girlfriend who you told that I was just temporary, not anyone important? His face went white. Victoria, I could have exposed all of it at the wedding. I could have dragged every sordid detail into the light. But I didn't, because at some point, overkill becomes tasteless. I wanted to destroy you, Marcus, not drown everyone in your sewage. What do you want? His voice was barely audible now. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had watched me triumph. I want you to understand something. Are you listening? Yes. I came into our relationship hoping you would prove me wrong. I had been hurt before, used before, treated like a bank account with a body. I wanted to believe that love was possible. Real love. The kind that doesn't require financial disclosures and background checks. I was willing to give you everything, Marcus. My money, my company, my life. All you had to do was love me back. I turned to face him. You couldn't do it. You couldn't even fake it convincingly enough to close the deal. And now, you're going to spend the next several years of your life paying for that failure. In prison, probably, if the fraud charges stick. In poverty, certainly, once the foreclosures go through. In isolation, as everyone who ever smiled at you realizes that your family name is now worthless. Please, he whispered. There has to be something, some way. I can't survive prison, Victoria. I'm not built for it. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal from me. I'm begging you. He actually dropped to his knees, right there in my office. Call off the investigation. Let us keep the house. Just give us a chance to rebuild. I looked down at the man I had almost married, crumpled on my office floor, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just the cold clarity of a debt being settled. Get up, Marcus. You're embarrassing yourself. He struggled to his feet, tears streaming down his face. Here's what's going to happen, I said. And the investigation will proceed. The foreclosure will proceed. The legal consequences of your actions will proceed. Nothing you say or do can change that. However, I paused, watching hope flicker in his eyes. I am willing to make one small concession. Anything. Amber Sullivan and her child will need support. You are biologically responsible for that child, and you will sign documents acknowledging paternity and agreeing to pay child support to the fullest extent of whatever income you manage to earn for the rest of your life. Child support? I'll be broke. That's your problem. Figure it out. Work in the prison laundry. Get a job at a fast food restaurant when you get out. I don't care what you do, but you will support that child, or I will make the rest of your life so much worse than you can possibly imagine. And if I agree, then I won't pursue the additional charges my investigators have uncovered. The escort services, the gambling, the other women, all of it stays private. You'll still face the fraud charges, but your reputation won't be dragged through every tabloid in the country. I let that sink in. It's the best deal you're going to get, Marcus. I suggest you take it. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, struggling to compose himself. You really are the Ice Queen, aren't you? They were right about you. They were right about a lot of things. I pressed the button on my desk that summoned security. James will show you out. Have your lawyer contact mine about the paternity agreement. And Marcus? He paused at the door. If you ever contact me again, if you come to my office, if you call my phone, if you so much as send a card on my birthday, I will release everything I have on you. Every embarrassing, humiliating criminal detail. And there will be no more deals after that. Do you understand? He understood. I could see it in his eyes. The final, absolute comprehension that he had lost. That there was no charm, no manipulation, no clever angle that could save him from the consequences of his own choices. Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Marcus. The door closed behind him. I stood at the window for a long time after that, watching the sun set over my city. The empire I had built spread out below me. Buildings I owned, companies I controlled, lives I could shape with a signature or destroy with a phone call. It was everything I had ever worked for. Everything I had sacrificed my youth, my innocence, my capacity for trust to achieve. And it felt like ashes in my mouth. But that feeling would pass. It always did. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new enemies, new mountains to climb. The world didn't stop spinning just because my heart had been broken. It never had before. It wouldn't start now. I was Victoria Blackwell. I had survived poverty, betrayal, and the slow death of hope. I would survive this too. I had to. There was no other choice. 6 months later, I stood in the same reception hall where my wedding had imploded, but everything else had changed. The Whitmores were gone. Marcus had pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud and was currently serving a 4-year sentence at a minimum security federal facility. His mother had not been so fortunate. The investigation had revealed her direct involvement in the pension fund embezzlement, and she was facing 8 to 12 years in a state prison. The family home had been sold at auction. The Hamptons property had been sold at auction. Every asset they had accumulated over 3 generations had been liquidated to pay legal fees and restitution. I had bought the house at auction just to see the look on Helen's face when she found out. Then I had donated it to a women's shelter. Let her legacy be something useful for once. The reception hall, tonight, was hosting the Blackwell Foundation's inaugural charity gala, a fundraiser for organizations that helped women escape financial abuse and fraud. I had personally invited every person who had attended my wedding, every person who had laughed when Helen called me a desperate nobody. Some of them had declined, most had not. They came to see me in my element. They came to pay tribute to the woman who had dismantled her enemies so thoroughly that they had become cautionary tales. They came because, in the end, power was the only currency that truly mattered, and I had proven that I possessed it in abundance. I moved through the crowd like a queen among courtiers, accepting congratulations and well wishes and thinly veiled requests for favor. The same people who had whispered behind my back now competed for my attention. The same people who had dismissed me as just a teacher now hung on my every word. It should have felt satisfying. In a way, it did, but satisfaction wasn't the same as happiness. I was learning that lesson slowly, painfully, with every lonely night in my penthouse apartment, and every morning I woke up alone. At 9 o'clock, I gave a speech. I talked about the Foundation's mission, about the women we would help, about the importance of financial literacy and independence. I did not talk about Marcus. I did not talk about revenge. Those chapters were closed now, and I had no interest in reopening them. After the speech, I retreated to a quiet corner with a glass of wine, watching the crowd from a distance. The band played something soft and romantic. Couples danced, laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Mrs. Blackwell?" I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I'm Margaret Sullivan, Amber's mother." I blinked. Amber had never mentioned a mother, only a sister. James's background research had indicated she had no family contact. "I'm her foster mother," Margaret clarified, as if reading my confusion. "I took her in when she was 15, and I like to think I'm the closest thing to family she has. She talks about you constantly, you know, what you did for her." "She accepted the support package?" "She did. She finished her degree last month, business administration if you can believe it. She's already had 3 job offers." Margaret smiled. "She named the baby Victoria. After you." Something caught in my throat. "She didn't have to do that. She wanted to. She says, you're the first person who ever showed her that power doesn't have to mean cruelty. That you can have everything and still choose kindness." Margaret reached out and squeezed my hand. "I just wanted to thank you for seeing my girl as a person instead of an enemy, for giving her a chance." "Everyone deserves a chance," I said softly. That's all I did. "No." Margaret shook her head. "You did much more than that. You broke the cycle. Marcus hurt you both. But instead of passing that hurt along, you chose to heal someone instead. That takes a kind of strength that money can't buy." She drifted back into the crowd, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Victoria. Amber had named her daughter Victoria. I raised my wine glass toward the distant ceiling, toward whatever forces governed the universe, toward the woman I was trying to become. "To second chances," I murmured, "and to the women who give them." I drank deeply and turned back to the party. The night was still young. The closing months of that year brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Blackwell Holdings continued to thrive. The Nexus acquisition had paid dividends beyond my projections, and our manufacturing division was now the largest in the region. I expanded the foundation, hired new staff, launched initiatives that would help thousands of women in situations similar to mine. The board stopped questioning my decisions. The media stopped speculating about my love life. The society pages found new scandals to obsess over. I dated occasionally, carefully, cautiously, with the kinds of background checks that would make a presidential candidate nervous. The men I met were pleasant enough. Executives, entrepreneurs, once a senator's son, who seemed more interested in my portfolio than my personality. None of them sparked anything beyond polite conversation. I began to wonder if Marcus had broken something in me permanently, if I would ever be able to trust another person enough to let them close. Then, in October, I received an unexpected email. It came from Richard Morrison, the CEO of Nexus Industries, or former CEO rather, since he had retired shortly after I took control. The message was brief. His wife of 40 years had passed away, and he was hosting a small memorial service. Would I consider attending? I went, partly out of respect and partly out of curiosity. The service was held in a small chapel on the Morrison estate, attended by perhaps 50 people, family, close friends, a few business associates who had known Elizabeth Morrison before the cancer took her. Richard's eulogy was simple and devastating. He talked about meeting Elizabeth in college, about building a life together, about the small moments that meant more than any business triumph. He cried openly, without shame, and his grief was so pure that it made my chest ache with something I couldn't name. After the service, I found him standing alone by his wife's grave. "Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry for your loss." He turned, his eyes red, but his composure intact. "Mrs. Blackwell, thank you for coming. It would have meant a lot to Elizabeth." Did she know about the wedding, the acquisition, all of it? She knew. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. She thought it was the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. A woman scorned, turning the tables on her betrayers. She said you reminded her of herself when she was young. I'm not sure I earned that comparison. Neither was she at first. But then she watched what you did for that young woman, Amber, the baby. Richard shook his head slowly. That's when she knew you were different. Power corrupts most people, Mrs. Blackwell. It seems to have refined you. We stood in silence for a moment, the autumn wind rustling the leaves around us. Can I offer you some advice? Richard asked finally. Old man to young woman? Please. Don't let the victories make you cold. I've watched too many successful people retreat into their fortresses, too afraid of being hurt again to let anyone through the gates. They end up surrounded by everything they ever wanted and no one to share it with. He looked toward the grave. Elizabeth and I had 42 years together. We fought sometimes. We disappointed each other sometimes. But we never let the world make us afraid to love. That's easier said than done. Of course it is. Everything worth doing is. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You built an empire, Victoria. Now, build a life. Don't let Marcus Whitmore be the man who stole your faith in love. He doesn't deserve that much power over you. I thought about those words for weeks afterward. Richard Morrison was right. I had built my empire, achieved my revenge, established my legacy. But somewhere along the way, I had also built walls so high that even I couldn't see over them anymore. In November, I made a decision. I called Elena into my office and told her to clear my schedule for the next month. I was going to travel, not for business, but for myself. I was going to visit places I had always wanted to see. The art museums of Paris, the temples of Kyoto, the northern lights over Iceland. I was going to eat food I couldn't pronounce and meet people who had never heard of Victoria Blackwell or Blackwell Holdings or the wedding disaster of the century. I was going to remember what it felt like to be a person, not just a power center. Elena looked at me like I had announced I was joining a circus, but she made the arrangements without comment. That was why I paid her what I paid her. The month abroad changed something in me. I can't explain exactly what or how. Maybe it was the distance from my regular life, or the anonymity of being just another tourist in a crowd, or the simple act of experiencing beauty without calculating its investment potential. By the time I returned, something had shifted. I started having dinner with friends again. Real dinners, not business meals disguised as social occasions. I took up painting, which I was terrible at, and cooking, which I was surprisingly not terrible at. I adopted a cat, a grumpy orange tabby I named Prophet, who had no interest in my net worth and plenty of opinions about when I should feed him. And slowly, gradually, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was still possible for me. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 6 months after the gala, almost a year to the day since my wedding had become headline news. It was handwritten on prison stationery, the envelope marked with Marcus Whitmore's inmate number. My first instinct was to burn it unread, as I had burned his previous attempt at contact. But something made me hesitate. I opened it. Victoria, it began, I know I have no right to write to you. I know you told me never to contact you again, and I know you have every reason to carry out your threat. But I needed to say this. Even if you destroy this letter without reading it, I was wrong. Not just about trying to deceive you, that's obvious. And I've had 18 months to contemplate exactly how wrong it was. I mean, I was wrong about everything. About what mattered, about what success looked like, about the kind of man I wanted to be. My mother raised me to see people as resources. She taught me that love was a tool, marriage was a transaction, and the only measure of a person's worth was what they could provide. I believed her because it was easier than believing I deserved to be loved for myself. You showed me what real strength looks like. Not cruelty dressed up as sophistication, actual strength. The kind that builds instead of destroys. The kind that shows mercy without being weak. I hated you for it at first. Now, I just feel sad for the man I was, who could have had someone like you and was too broken to appreciate it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that you were right and I was wrong. And I'm trying to become someone better. Someone who might have deserved you. I hope you find happiness, Victoria. Real happiness with someone who sees you clearly. You deserve that. You deserved it from me, and I failed you. Thank you for letting Amber keep the baby. Thank you for not destroying her when you could have. Thank you for being the person you are. I won't write again. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, then set it down on my desk. Did I believe him? I didn't know. People could change. I knew that from personal experience. Prison had a way of forcing reflection, of stripping away pretense and leaving only the raw core of who you really were. But trust couldn't be rebuilt with a single letter. Whatever Marcus had become in his cell, he was still the man who had tried to steal from me, who had laughed about my desperation with his mother, who had seen me as a mark instead of a person. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, underneath old photographs and mementos from a life I rarely looked back on. I wouldn't destroy it. That felt petty, somehow, like I was still afraid of him. But I wouldn't respond either. His chapter was over. Mine was just beginning. The spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Blackwell Holdings expanded into international markets. The foundation helped its 1,000th client. I turned 40 with a party that my friends insisted on throwing, despite my protestations that I had no interest in celebrating aging. 40. The age my mother had been when she died, the age my father had been when he lost everything. I had beaten them both, built something lasting from the ruins they left behind. But standing on my penthouse balcony, watching the sun rise over my city, I couldn't help but think about all the things I had lost along the way. The capacity for simple trust, the belief in fairy tales, the hope that love could exist without leverage. Maybe Richard Morrison was right. Maybe I needed to build a life now that I had built an empire. But that was easier said than done. My phone buzzed with the morning's first message. Elena reminding me about a board meeting at 10. I set down my coffee cup and headed inside to face another day. The empire wouldn't run itself. The final piece of my story fell into place on a rainy afternoon in May, exactly 18 months after my wedding had made headlines around the world. I was attending a technology conference. Blackwell Holdings was sponsoring the keynote, and I was expected to make an appearance. The usual rounds of handshakes and small talk, the careful dance of corporate networking. I had done it 1,000 times before. The keynote speaker was a man named Daniel Ashworth, a former engineer who had founded a renewable energy company that was revolutionizing solar panel efficiency. I had heard of him, of course. Everyone in the industry had. His technology was impressive, his company was profitable, and his reputation was impeccable. What I hadn't expected was for him to be kind. We met backstage before his presentation. He was tall, with gray-streaked hair and laugh lines around his eyes, dressed in a simple suit that probably cost a fraction of what most executives spend on a single tie. He shook my hand with genuine warmth, not the calculated grip of someone measuring my usefulness. Mrs. Blackwell, it's an honor to meet you. Please, call me Victoria. And the honor is mine. Your work on photovoltaic efficiency is remarkable. You've read our research papers? I've read everything published about your company for the past 3 years. I smiled at his surprised expression. Due diligence before the sponsorship. I like to know what I'm investing in. And what did your due diligence tell you? That you're either genuinely committed to saving the planet, or you're the most sophisticated con artist in the history of green technology. I tilted my head. I'm betting on the former. He laughed. A real laugh, not the polished chuckle of corporate politics. I'm glad to hear it. Some days, I'm not sure myself. We talked for 20 minutes before his presentation about everything and nothing, renewable energy policy, the challenges of scaling sustainable technology, the gap between corporate rhetoric and actual environmental impact. He listened when I spoke, really listened, with his full attention, not just waiting for his turn to talk. And when he disagreed with me, he said so directly, without hedging or flattery. By the time he took the stage, I was intrigued. After the conference ended, I found myself lingering near the exit, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. It was ridiculous. I was Victoria Blackwell. I didn't wait around for men. If I wanted to see someone, I had assistants who could arrange it. But there was something about doing it this way, something that felt closer to who I had been before Marcus, before the walls and the armor and the constant vigilance. Waiting for someone? I turned. Daniel stood behind me, his bag over his shoulder, raindrops glittering in his hair. Actually, yes. I took a breath. I was wondering if you'd like to get coffee, to continue our conversation about photovoltaic efficiency. His eyebrows rose slightly. Photovoltaic efficiency? Among other things. He studied me for a moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. I've heard stories about you, you know. The wedding disaster, the corporate takeover, the public humiliation of the people who tried to deceive you. My heart sank. Of course he had. Everyone had. Does that change your answer? No. He smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile that made him look 10 years younger. It makes me more interested. Anyone who can build an empire and then take it apart with such precision, that's someone worth having coffee with. We had coffee. Then dinner. Then a walk through the rain-soaked streets, talking until my voice went hoarse. He wasn't perfect. No one was. He worked too hard and didn't know how to relax. He had failed marriages in his past and children who lived in other states. He carried his own scars, his own regrets, his own walls built from years of disappointment. But he saw me. Not my money, not my power, not the story the media had told about me. Me. Victoria, who was brilliant at business and terrible at relationships. Victoria, who had learned to be hard because the world had given her no other choice. Victoria, who was trying, slowly and imperfectly, to let herself be soft again. I didn't tell him about Marcus right away. There was no need. He already knew the public version, and the private version could wait until we trusted each other more. Instead, I told him about my father's death, about building the company from nothing, about the years of loneliness that success couldn't cure. He listened. He didn't flinch. And when I was done, he took my hand and said, "Thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. But you did it anyway." He squeezed my hand gently. "That's what courage looks like, Victoria. Not the big dramatic moments. The small, terrifying ones where you choose to be vulnerable instead of safe." I looked at him. This man who built things that would outlast him, who measured success in lives improved rather than dollars accumulated, who had somehow slipped past all my defenses without even trying. I'm not very good at this, I admitted. Relationships, trust, all of it. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to panic and pull away and probably say terrible things at the worst. Possible moments. So will I. He smiled. But we'll figure it out together. That's the point, isn't it? Not to be perfect, just to keep trying. I kissed him then, standing on a rain-soaked street corner with my designer shoes soaking through and my perfectly styled hair dripping down my face. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't anything like the careful performances I had learned to give. It was real. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, that felt like enough. The story of Victoria Blackwell and Marcus Whitmore became a legend, told and retold until the details blurred and the morals shifted depending on who was doing the telling. To some, I was a hero, the wronged woman who refused to be a victim. To others, I was a villain, the ruthless corporate shark who destroyed a family for pride. Most people fell somewhere in between, fascinated by the spectacle without fully understanding what had driven it. I stopped paying attention to the interpretations. Let them tell whatever story they wanted. I knew the truth. I had been hurt. I had sought revenge. I had gotten it, thoroughly and completely. And then I had learned that revenge, however satisfying in the moment, was not enough to build a life on. The life I built afterward was quieter, richer, fuller than anything I had imagined during those 18 months of careful deception. Daniel and I married 2 years after that rainy first kiss. A small ceremony, no press, just 50 people who mattered to us. Amber Sullivan was there, holding little Victoria on her hip. Richard Morrison was there, still mourning his Elizabeth, but happy to witness new love taking root. Even Elena was there, dabbing at her eyes and pretending she wasn't crying. We didn't live happily ever after. That's a fairy tale, and I had long since stopped believing in those. What we had was something better, a partnership built on honesty, strengthened by the mutual understanding that we were both damaged goods, doing our best to be whole. Blackwell Holdings continued to grow. The foundation continued to help women in need. Marcus served his sentence and faded into obscurity. Last I heard, he was working at an auto parts store in a distant state, paying child support and trying to rebuild some semblance of a life. Helen died in prison, complications from her heart condition, mourned by no one except perhaps the son she had raised to be a predator. I chose not to feel anything about that. They had made their choices. I had made mine. The ledger was balanced. The last scene of my story takes place on an evening 5 years after the wedding that never was. I'm standing in my garden, our garden, Daniel's and mine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Our daughter plays in the grass nearby, shrieking with delight as Prophet the cat pretends to hunt her. Daniel comes up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? The past, I admit. Where I've been, how I got here. Any regrets? I consider the question seriously. Do I regret the woman I had to become to survive? The hardness, the calculation, the willingness to destroy those who threatened me? The love I could not save, the trust I could not give, the years spent behind walls of my own making? No, I say finally. No regrets, just gratitude. For the lessons, for the journey, for ending up exactly where I am. Daniel kisses my temple. Sounds like a good place to be. It is. I lean back into his warmth, watching our daughter laugh, watching the sky blaze with color, watching the life I had built from the ashes of the one that burned. It really is. The desperate nobody had become a queen, and the queen had found her kingdom at last. Not the one she had dreamed of as a girl, with its princes and castles and promises of forever. Something better. Something earned. A kingdom built on the foundations of her own strength, defended by her own will, populated by people she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real.